So it's odd to see a BioWare game with the Star Wars IP of all feel this, well, sparse.
Honestly, the players seem to care more about onboarding new players than the developers do.
You have to remember, 2 other Star Wars MMOs have already been closed down. I'm not saying this one is likely to be closed down anytime soon. I'm just saying there's definitely some concerns about the content that it's going to be getting in the future, if any.
The discussion was that if this was the kind of writer that BioWare was hiring to work on the game, fans should not expect anything but a bunch of liberal propaganda inserted unnecessarily into Star Wars.
When I went to this last version of the GRE event, I was just reminded about how different the game is now. I had to switch to the PvP instance because for some reason I thought people would be there. But as I sped around with my quests ready to complete, I could not find a single soul.
But I'm not crying. I'm not a crier. I don't cry. I work out. I have hobbies. I don't come here.
Star Wars: The Old Republic, the MMO that had a development budget of around
$100 billion.
$200 million. With that size budget, you could almost fund another season of The Acolyte. So how does a game that invested so much money, along with having an original team of nearly 1,000 members, winning several awards and breaking world records, end up in such a neglected state with barely any players, less than 80 on the full-time staff, and a severe dip in quality? This is the official Star Wars: The Old Republic documentary, the MMO that refuses to die.
The circle closes. The end begins.
Listen, this video is going to be pretty long, so just chill, relax, and enjoy the show. Back in 2011, when this game first released, the world was taken by storm. From the epic cinematic trailers down to the discovery of 8 full storylines to play, all of which could rival most single-player games of that era. And to be fair, maybe could even today.
I was never, nor shall I ever be, your slave.
Now obviously, an online Star Wars game would reasonably be quite exciting. But this game offered an answer to something in particular that fans had been waiting for ever since Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2. And that's the answer to the question, where did Revan disappear to?
There was a time, a moment, when my destiny wasn't certain. That moment is gone.
Fans of the Knights of the Old Republic franchise were left hanging with the way Revan's story ended. A larger threat was teased and seemingly looming over the Old Republic galaxy. Star Wars: The Old Republic brought answers. With the game's inception, more story was contracted by Lucasfilm. We saw this manifest into the Darth Malgus novel, which explains the sacking of Coruscant in great detail and its aftermath. But alongside this, we were also given the Revan novel. So what does this have to do with the game? Well, despite the huge wave of excitement as the game initially launched, fans quickly became divided when they saw how their old and beloved characters were treated. While yes, this game's original core value was to make you feel like you are the star and not the side characters, the players just expected a lot more from the inclusion of Revan in the game, along with Mitra Surik the Exile, and even HK-47 the Assassin Droid.
I am HK-47, the Master's most faithful ally.
Fans were divided because Revan was seemingly heralded by the Republic faction, and then swiftly killed off by the Imperial faction. People felt like their favourite character was shoehorned into the game just to attract them in, and then seemingly brush off those characters as if they were some form of side content that was meant to be seen once and then never seen again. While being able to look back at this more than 10 years later does make it seem like a trivial issue, at the time it was a huge blow to the community who waited for that specific thing. So when the initial wave of players discovered this, heavy criticism was sent to the game's studio, and that was a lot of players. In fact, 3.8 million characters had been made in this game soon after it officially launched. This story issue was exacerbated when players discovered that when you take your companion, Lord Scourge, a character from the Revan novel and game, to meet with Revan in the game, no special dialogue happens. These are two characters that face the Sith Emperor together, and yet when they meet during a cutscene, there was not a single reference at all, which just added to the criticism of the developers mistreating these characters, or at least is just one of the issues. Allow me to be clear, the game does offer you very cool story features, such as when you are an acolyte at the start of the game, people around the world react to the species you choose to play. Sith purebloods are more accepted in dialogue when you are on Korriban, but Twi'leks and other aliens are insulted often for their slave heritage within the overall lore. So when something like that is on the starter planet, I guess fans are left wondering why the same level of passion, and while this story in particular does help paint a picture of how this game was seen around when it launched, it is still just one of many issues players have had with the game.
Well, when we started talking about creating the Sith classes for the game, there were two themes to explore: domination and power. And from the existing examples of Sith in the movies, there are two different stories to be told. One about the brilliant mastermind, the powermonger, the Sith Inquisitor, and the other about the mighty dark champion on the battlefield, the Sith warrior.
Star Wars: The Old Republic was super ambitious in its original vision. On top of the 8 class stories, we also received entire written stories for each planet as a side chain of missions you can do, many of which have a bonus series for when you're a higher level too, and every single one was voice acted and fully cinematic. The exploration, world immersion, and overall size and scope of the game was just truly incredible. As your story progressed, you would visit a new world and always discover something new, and that's still true to this day even for me. It's that huge. The unfinished Colossus on Drummond Cars. Did you know that that's a depiction of Darth Vowron? His rival Darth Barris sent interruptions to stop her work from being completed. Republic locations have a calm and modern theme for architecture, even the lighting is nice and soft, while Imperial locations have a much more official vibe to them, as if they were made for efficiency and administration, and not comfort or visual pleasure. Not that the Sith don't have beautiful structures, they absolutely do. More cool things you'll discover in this game are you can construct your own datacron using shards you've found from across the galaxy. You go to these secret locations which have the equipment to make the datacrons, and the machines you use are Rakatan technology, so it's even within scope and lore accurate for creating such devices. The attention to detail is incredible. Did you know that you can incubate and hatch an egg in this game and add a new pet to your collection? It's small things like this which make the game feel massive and jam-packed. All the content that came with launch was massive, and the overall amount of amazing story to experience is just insane. It's fair to say that the original storylines for this game, along with the world quests and more, all made this game truly amazing for the players, and still to this day, they remain a core element of this beautiful galaxy that has been crafted. The story was critically acclaimed and praised worldwide, despite some of the setbacks caused by the feedback around Darth Revan. Of course though, like other MMOs, Star Wars: The Old Republic opted to include traditional game systems like PvP warzones, a crafting system with professions, group player content in the form of flashpoints, and more on the way. Crafting in the game was something the devs wanted to be simple, and not to get in the way of adventuring for players.
The crew skill system in Star Wars: The Old Republic is designed to give you the best of both worlds. We want you to be able to enjoy crafting without having to take time out from your adventures.
They made a simple feature that offers easy to understand professions that gather materials and allow you to craft various items that you may or may not need. Certain unique items had to be crafted by a player if you wanted to obtain it, so maxing out your crafting skills would often be quite rewarding, while making you popular among your peers who have not yet done the same. There was nothing wrong with the crafting system, but there also wasn't much that was incredible about it either. One cool thing was that each companion you had would be better at a certain thing, giving you incentive to use certain companions for specific tasks.
Hammer Station was an armored fortress built by the Republic during the war. Its primary weapon was a gravity cannon designed to propel asteroids into planets.
Flashpoints are Star Wars: The Old Republic's version of a dungeon. Group content that required 4 players, 1 tank, 2 damage dealers and 1 healer. Every flashpoint came with its own fully voiced story content, allowing players to join in with each other in dialogue situations and have a group experience. Making dialogue choices while in a group would give you social points, which when increased enough would give you access to more items in the game. Perfect way to incentivize players into being okay with making dialogue options together, rather than doing it solo. The content was good enough for players at the time, and offered enough challenge and diverse mechanics to assure that replayability was top tier. You could even do the flashpoints in a harder difficulty when you got to max level, and work towards even better gear while facing harder enemies to defeat.
Die, or defeat me. Either way, the Empire is reborn.
Each flashpoint required the usual tank, healing and damage dealing roles, which made for balanced group play and fun combat experiences. They quickly became the player's go-to for group content and play. They were fun, fast and even skippable, and gave rewards. Any MMO player knows this combo fits well. The content just worked, until it didn't.
If you're a veteran player, you're not going to have as much fun in the game. You have to almost make your own fun, which is an element to any MMO that you play. But this one, in particular, they have really catered to the new player and single player experience, which the new player, I understand. The single player, I will probably always lean on the side of I don't get, because I know we all have played solo in any MMO that we play for a period of time. Like, that's just part of it, right? But to not have social features as a big component, I think is a mistake. Doing Group Finder and just playing with 4 DPS and raffle stomping everyone in all of those things is boring. I think having consequences for not healing, not tanking, and not doing enough damage in flashpoints should be brought back. I think it would be a really good way for players to learn the specs, especially when they want to get into like raiding content or world boss stuff later on, harder types of content. You know, I think that would be beneficial, useful.
It is common knowledge that PvP and raiding content are among the most important for an MMO. These two features for any MMO are always held to a high standard, and this is because it's usually the most played type of content. But the original developer team for this game chose unwisely when it came to the game's engine. The Hero engine was used to develop this game in its entirety. However, because of the huge scope this game had, and the fact that BioWare had no experience with MMOs before, the engine was soon transformed into a horrible mess of code. If you were to reverse engineer it now, you would not recognize it as the Hero engine. It would seem the lack of experience in this department really hit them hard, because PvP and operations suffered with performance issues non-stop. In any given situation where more than 4 players were fighting, lag and stutter would occur. Even just standing idle on the fleet would cause you to lag in the game sometimes. Performance issues topped with countless bugs in combat, such as not being able to see force charge without it pulling you back, desync, missing stone platforms in operations that cause you to fall to your death. The endgame content for Star Wars The Old Republic was not having a good time. It became clear very quickly to the players that all the passion and effort went into making story for the game, while other features were seemingly unpolished and left to suffer with performance issues. So when players hit max level and saw the fiasco that was vanilla endgame, they just simply were not happy. The developers had knocked it out the park with story and world immersion, but utterly failed to deliver a playable and enjoyable endgame for the community. Open world PvP suffered the most. Certain worlds would have contested areas that would be PvP enabled, but the arranging of any event with mass amounts of players resulted in a PowerPoint presentation for everyone. If not, it would crash their computers. If not that, crashing the actual server for the game. It was clear as day that this side of the game was not ready, and it needed more work.
When we were first talking about doing a massively multiplayer game for BioWare, really the vision of what that game would be was to bring storytelling, BioWare storytelling, to the MMO space.
Despite the issues and setbacks so far, the future looked bright for BioWare as they achieved huge success in the game's initial release. According to the statistics, at launch, the game logged more than 28 million in-game hours, which I'm told is equivalent to watching the original trilogy and prequel trilogy 2 million times. Players averaged more than 5 hours a day, they created more than 3.8 million characters, 510,000 of which were Jedi Knights and 550,000 were Sith warriors, and more than 2 billion NPCs were killed by players in just the early access period alone. Calling SWTOR an initial success might actually be an understatement given these numbers. But regardless of how many people played upon release, these statistics would slowly taper off as time goes on, so much so that they stopped releasing the numbers publicly. Before the first expansion for the game, the players saw a few different updates that came in different flavours. We had the Rakghoul flashpoints, including the ever-infamous Lost Island,
Gaze upon the pinnacle of evolution with awe and terror.
Then we received the Legacy system, which added a lot of convenience for players through unlocks that would be account-wide. Group Finder was later added, which seems very late to the party for a massively multiplayer online game, but we got it in the end. This would put us into 2013, which is actually the same year the novel Into the Void was released, which was themed on the Gree species. So Star Wars The Old Republic also added content to match this theme, and players saw their first in-game event, which was named Relics of the Gree.
Official sources have refused to comment.
This event came with excellent replayability and a new operation boss that required a reputation grind. It was a solid update. There was even a new open world PvP element, and players were in love with the additional attention. However, this content would still be plagued with performance issues and FPS losses for everyone. Even players with a powerful PC at the time were still unable to receive steady frame rates, making this content almost unplayable for the average player, which would see the interest in that particular content taper off and become a distant memory. As time went on, it is not like the developers did not try to improve performance for the game with optimization. You can see as much here with the patch notes from back in 2012. Back-end optimization was something they were striving to work on and see through for the players. But as time would go on, that promise would seemingly be forgotten. Instead, the developers opted to keep adding new content, rather than fixing what was already there. For some players, the introduction of HK51 as a new companion to obtain, rather than more performance fixes, came as a kick in the teeth.
Hey guys, what's going on? This is going to be a little bit of a sad news video. A lot of you guys have been asking, Zyback, where's the Star Wars videos? Haven't seen any Star Wars videos in a month. You still playing? You gonna be covering the next patch? Blah, blah, blah. And, yeah, yesterday I unsubscribed. Uninstalled the game and unsubscribed. Not even just an unsubscribe. I uninstalled the game as well. So, not happy. Not happy, man. This is coming from a guy that really wanted to play this game. I was looking forward to this game. Thought this game had a ton of potential, just a ridiculous amount of potential. And, yeah, it's the biggest almost but not quite in gaming history. I've never seen a game look so good and let me down as much as this game had.
Seemingly, the important endgame systems that make an MMO, well, an MMO, were being ignored in favour of novelty Star Wars content, while these kind of updates were taken well by some of the story and character enthusiasts. The people who just wanted a good game to play were not so pleased. It came to the point that players were no longer willing to pay a subscription to play the game, and in turn they lost droves of players as a consequence. In response, BioWare and EA decided to make the game free to play, with a ton of restrictions. We'll touch more on this a little bit later, but when this happened, the community hoped that the wave of new players from this would help to fund or even motivate the developers to improve the game's performance even more. New players would be joining the game and expressing excitement about getting to endgame and trying it out. The only real response from veteran players was to take as much time as possible going through the story, while fixes roll out.
Gee, I can't wait till I go to hikes. Well,
Don't you say that. Don't you ever say that. Stay here.
But instead, they decided to add even more new content, rather than important fixes for bugs and optimization. And because of that, many players just lost faith, especially when that content was Rise of the Hutt Cartel.
13 days ago, the Hutt Cartel violated Republic space and seized the planet Macabre.
April of 2013 saw the release of Star Wars The Old Republic's first ever expansion, and this is pretty much when players started to accept what type of game Star Wars The Old Republic really is. A game that blew everyone's mind with their storytelling, but severely lacked the ability to make a cohesive and enjoyable multiplayer aspect. With rivals like World of Warcraft and Guild Wars 2, Star Wars The Old Republic was finding it pretty hard to earn its place in the market. The first expansion brought one single world to explore, Makeb. A new game feature called Macro Binoculars. Yep, someone actually designed goggles for the game as a thing to do. Anyways, they also added the Seeker Droid, which was another novelty update that allowed you to search an area for buried treasure, which seems a little off-theme for a Star Wars game, but it is what it is. The players also received a new operation, Scum and Villainy, which is still one of the community's favourite operations to replay, as it offers fun mechanics and lengthy playtime. This content was received well by players, but ultimately it proved too little after waiting over a year. In fact, just reading the patch notes for this expansion was really depressing. If you compare it to the patch notes for an expansion with World of Warcraft, you almost want to cry. This expansion had to be paid for as well, by the way. I believe at the time it was around $20. Once again, something was clearly going wrong. From my own observations over the years, it appears to me that the developers have almost always had an issue accepting player feedback. In fact, I've heard from OG players who used to eat, sleep, and the player test server, and they confirm that the developers listened well during the game's early access, but this died down after the game's launch, leading to these committed players who test content to stop doing the developers favors with free testing and in-detail feedback, which you could say has affected the quality of updates, even more so when you consider that the player test server was then turned on and off for many years after that. The community, who was dedicated to quality assurance, did not feel listened to, and this theme carried on over pretty much every expansion the game saw. Years pass by and performance updates and bug fixes become a running inside joke for the player base. Bugs are no longer bugs, they've been around for so long, they are now game features. It could be desync, clipping through clothes, companions falling into the ground, your camera randomly snapping away, your mouse suddenly practicing its Sonic impression, getting stuck on world objects, hair not appearing underneath HUDs, random missing UI elements, launcher issues with full screen mode, your cargo or legacy bay taking 10 million years to open. All of these things are bugs and have been bugged since they were released. Except because they still exist in the game even now, they are dismissed as comedic in-game features that will never be addressed. And while yes, it is kind of funny to laugh at incompetence, it is also really sad. Despite the ignorance in terms of maintenance for the game, the studio seemingly carried on with a somewhat healthy player base and income, bringing new updates to the game such as the heralded Dread War update.
Long ago, you sought to free us from Belsara's prison.
Arguably, this update was Star Wars The Old Republic's peak. We had a new world called Oricon, which had this epic corrupted theme and mentally ill NPCs to kill. 2 new operations, Dread Fortress and Dread Palace, which I would argue are the best operations in this entire game. Incredible story that had us saving our capital worlds from the reach of the Dreadmasters. A story that brought us more content than any other update before, or even to come. Scum and Villainy was attached to this story, Terror from Beyond, a whole planet story arc, new gear sets and a pretty cool Tauntaun mount and some of the drippiest armor pieces we've ever seen. There was even a secret NPC that dropped the hallowed Gothic's headgear, unique looking piece, but it still checks out. This update had something for everyone. It was an all-round good update, even though it once again came at the cost of ignoring important fixes. Even though this content update was a huge success with players, we would not see this replicated again. As with this next expansion, BioWare did something not many of us thought possible. They wrote a bad story? Cue Shadow of Revan.
I almost had the infinite army I wanted so badly, but even without them, I have enough.
With this expansion, the developers once again aimed for the same level of quality the Dread War had, bringing a new story that took us to 3 new worlds, Manaan, Yavin 4 and Rishi, 2 new operations, one of which was Revan, so that's a bonus, Revamped combat skill trees and more came with this expansion, which by the way was another paid expansion. While the group content was fun and the new worlds were cool to explore, the story that came with Shadow of Revan seemingly split the fan base once again. Either BioWare was going truly wrong, or perhaps Revan is just one of those characters that shouldn't be messed with too often. Either way, the community was split about their opinions. Half of the players enjoyed the Revan Reborn story arc and looked forward to what would happen next. Others were truly disappointed to see Revan act in such a different way. This version of Revan wanted bloodshed and war, even if it was with the Republic, and fans of Revan just did not resonate with that. The backlash from this was felt, so much so that the dev team was being changed up more than ever. New faces would appear on the forums all the time, almost as if no one developer stayed with the game for too long. Even Drew Karpyshyn, the man behind the creation of Revan with the original games, also left BioWare and decided not to work on Star Wars The Old Republic anymore. It does make you wonder, was Drew able to see his vision out for Darth Revan? Was there perhaps internal disagreements about story direction and what is possible? While this is speculation, some of us believe that the best Star Wars writer in existence wouldn't just leave for no reason, right? So this time around, the game somehow managed to satisfy group content players, but divide the story-driven players. And even though some of that seems negative, just know that the game in this era was technically thriving. Updates were often and bulky. Between the Dread War and Shadow of Revan, you have a lot of content. When the Revan Reborn story arc wrapped up, the devs began a new storyline that would be the culmination of the entire game's plot. The Sith Emperor wants to consume the galaxy, and we get the Ziost updates.
The scores of dead have nourished me.
The Emperor.
This galaxy is mine. It's time. I claimed it.
This was the developer's love letter to story players. It was action-packed and the writing was actually really good. The antagonist was the Sith Emperor, so not much could go wrong here with a fan favourite in the spotlight. The developers even added a new lair boss on this world for the group players. Star Wars The Old Republic was definitely in a good place at this time. But next, they made a decision that ruined their reputation as an MMO.
A man can have anything if he's willing to sacrifice.
The studio always claimed that the game would be story-driven. In fact, it was the game's selling point, given it had more voice lines than any other game in existence. But the community did not expect the team to make such a drastic choice. With Knights of the Fallen Empire, they opted to pretty much completely ignore endgame content and add no new operations or the like, causing 2 years of little to no updates to multiplayer at all. They focused solely on telling story through a new system called chapters, a really innovative way to tell stories. This basically solidified Star Wars The Old Republic in the market as one of the worst multiplayer games you could currently play, due to the immense lack of modern group content. However, the story-focused players loved this update and encouraged more of it to happen. At this point in time, Star Wars The Old Republic stopped charging people for expansions, and instead, subscribers would get free access and keep access. The business model change was initially welcomed, but nobody realized this would affect them negatively. When you don't charge for your expansions, you don't make any money. But the choice was already made and the developers did not want to change it back. Perhaps this explains the sudden rampant focus on the cash shop items during this period, but we'll talk about the cash shop a little later on. It's more than fair to say that Knights of the Fallen Empire and Knights of the Eternal Throne put the nail in the coffin for this game, and cemented the fact that players would be tuning out for months, sometimes years on end, to come back and play for a short time and then just repeat. While this level of player retention isn't exactly inspiring for an MMO, the developers, or perhaps EA, seemingly became quite content with it. Rather than aiming to improve player retention and make a better game, we saw the developers take longer and longer to make anything at all. The next operation that was released after years of waiting was released in bits and pieces, one boss at a time, which was really showing the players that the development team was not on the same level they were just a few years ago. When they were capable of making 2 full operations at once, something had changed. It was obvious. By the time group content was looked at again, players were not interested. So many solo players had joined the game that the developers had somehow accidentally made the game easier to accommodate them. NPCs were a cakewalk, bosses could be AFK'd while your companion does the work, and some mobs just wouldn't be able to outdamage your companion healing you, it wouldn't even be close. Eventually, even flashpoints became easier when they removed the need to have a tank and healer. These days you can just take a full group of DPS players and use the healing stations provided to you, which never used to be there. They were making it easier and more accessible to the solo players, which had the consequence of turning off the actual multiplayer community who seek to challenge. You don't even need a group for flashpoints, many of them can be soloed quite comfortably with a decent companion by your side. This shouldn't be possible, but it is. It is probably more fair to say that this was happening over a longer period of time, but the effects were really starting to show around this time period. Each year that passed, things would be made easier and less content would come to the game. Content droughts would become a common phrase in the Star Wars The Old Republic community. Too often the updates that came were just subtle changes to existing content that gave players the illusion of something new, a tactic that would surely not work forever.
Your destruction is inevitable.
By the time Onslaught is released in late 2019, it was crystal clear the game was not going back to its thriving state from years ago. In fact, recapturing that original vision would be impossible. The dev team is so immensely changed by this point, it's likely that most of them are unfamiliar with how the older game systems even work. The only recognizable developers were Eric Musco and Charles Boyd, but then Charles Boyd departed as the lead writer soon after Legacy of the Sith released in 2022.
Hey y'all, I'm back. One last time.
If you are a returning viewer on my channel, you are probably well informed about Legacy of the Sith and the current developer team. The expansion Onslaught was one of the shortest stories we ever saw come to the game. The developers said this update would be a return to Empire vs Republic, but instead we seemingly got Malgus's return and some nonsense with the Mandalorians. This was the beginning of the developers gaslighting the community, promising solid change and healthy updates, but proving to only bring mediocre content at best that is barely what they said it would be. It's a good job this was not a paid expansion, because the quality was just not there. The story was 80% shorter than the previous expansions, and the group content was too little too late. They made a new operation, but it's hard for it to mean much when the community once again had to wait years for it. The competition out there is pumping out content like a functional business. Star Wars The Old Republic is for some reason constantly lagging behind. It is like it just doesn't want to compete with others. Maybe it feels like it doesn't have to. By the time Legacy of the Sith released, with its more than 200 plus bugs on launch, it becomes just embarrassing to even consider comparing patch notes with another MMO. As we can tell, the current state of the game has a lot of issues for many reasons, but let's talk about PvP next.
My first main was a Guardian, but pretty soon I switched to Power Tech and Vanguard, started playing exclusively for PvP, and more than 10 years later, this is still my favorite class to play in any video game ever. I absolutely love running into the war zone and unleashing that APPT burst combo on someone. On top of that, I was lucky enough to have found a guild that became a group of friends over the years. But when Ranked was removed in patch 7.2, I saw many long-time PvPers and content creators quit the game. People said PvP was dying. So I started making PvP videos myself, trying to get more people interested in the game that I love. And less than 2 years later, and almost exclusively with Star Wars The Old Republic PvP content, we are now close to reaching 1 million views on the channel. So clearly there are many people still interested in PvP, and I'm sure many more would come back to it if a couple of changes were to be made.
PvP in Star Wars The Old Republic has always been in the top 3 of most fun content to play. There is quite literally nothing cooler than a bunch of Star Wars characters battling it out with lightsabers, force powers, and all kinds of different blasters and cannons. PvP in this game undoubtedly attracts every player at least once.
Back upon launch, PvP was quite interesting. The game had more of a RPG builder type of combat system, allowing for things like hybrid specializations, allowing you to dip into more defensive or offensive options depending on what your class could do. In other words, if you're capable of healing, you could pick up more healing options. During launch till the end of 1.0, the game maintained a rather simple combat style compared to today's standards. While there was a lot of utility, skill expression wasn't quite at its highest peak. But it was the start of something amazing. The core fundamentals of this game is unlike any other game out there. Some say it's a WoW clone. Well, yes, it takes some things from WoW, but there's nothing particularly wrong with that. Balance felt worse in general, and when 6.0 was fully fleshed out, it was sort of a band-aid after band-aid to deal with every single situation. Leaving quite a mess as you can imagine, but the core is still there, the game's still fun, it has its problems, but...
It was important for me to bring in other community members who are more experienced with PvP than I am. Although I've played this game for over a decade and have defeated my fair share of players, I am not and have never really claimed to be amazing at PvP. There are plenty of players out there who have creamed me in combat. Ivanhoe and Ceasefaith are these kind of people. They are ruthlessly merciless in PvP and know the strengths and weaknesses for almost all classes. With that in mind, I'm going to let them speak and we'll pick up from some of their talking points.
The first one is performance or game optimization. Because right now, even high-end PCs are dropping below 30 frames per second, and desync is a huge problem, especially on some maps, which makes the game frustrating to play and confusing, especially for new players. So, message to the devs, I know you are trying to modernize the game's graphics, which is great, but please also think about the impact this has on group content, where performance matters most. The second thing is class balance. Now I know this one will never be perfect, but it's been a long time since we had any meaningful changes here, and it makes the game very stale. The biggest issues I see are classes that rely on white damage being significantly weaker than their force and tech using counterparts. The amount of rotational roots and slows, which make the game very unfun for some melee classes. And then finally, the removal of key abilities in Legacy of the Sith, especially for Marauders and Assassins, which lost many iconic abilities and big parts of their skill expression as a result. And this leads me to the third and, in my opinion, most important point, because above all, PvP is about becoming good and then competing against other good players. And what keeps this game mode interesting for years and years is that every PvP match is a little bit different. You can always play just a little bit better, and it is really the journey to becoming a better player that keeps PvPers coming back to the game. So while PvP seasons are a good idea to get new players interested in PvP, there really needs to be a goal to work towards and a way to track your progress to measure how far you've improved. Now that could be bringing back ranked, or leaderboards for the PvP seasons that track your stats, or even some kind of PvP event or tournament. But ultimately, PvPers don't just want participation trophies, we want to prove our skill, and if we win, we want exclusive rewards that show off our accomplishments.
What is evident from Ivanhoe's account of PvP is that he cares deeply for its continued growth and more participation, but the points he brings home are all too familiar with even the average player of the game. Performance issues riddle pretty much all PvP content, so players with less powerful PCs are basically unable to access that content, at least not without being at a significant disadvantage. I believe the point Ivanhoe makes about graphics improvements affecting performance even more are incredibly valid. We've seen no meaningful updates to the game's core performance in many years, with the dev team instead opting to improve graphics and remaster old content in the current era. The PvP community is concerned that these updates will impact performance even more, making it less accessible to the average player, which, as we already know, is pretty much all players of this game.
That's nothing to what's about to happen. They went really hard on it, and one class named Juggernaut was a showcase for the first class to receive it. The original changes they had in mind would have made the class nearly unplayable for PvP, as if PvP was a complete afterthought. Not that players didn't already feel this way, we pushed back and hard on this. They changed things. It was better, not perfect. We were all willing to accept pruning, assuming it would happen equally amongst all classes. Moving on from that, PvP has been in the need of help for quite some time. We just finally made our first step forward to getting 8-man queue removed, which was something they added back in 7.2, for seemingly no other reason than to breed more chaos in the PvP community. Recently with 7.0, they made PvP completely free to play. They removed rated and in general gave PvPers no reason to stay subbed anymore. What money they could be making from those players is greatly reduced because of this. Sure, I could be wrong, and what's left of the Star Wars community, or PvP community, is too small for them to care about right now, but for the sake of the longevity in general, it's a worthwhile activity to put some effort into and improve. Now, I want to break this off a bit, as these are simply my opinions and educated ones at that, as I've PvP'd in this game for a long time. If you're not familiar with SWTOR's PvP, none of this will make much sense to you. These are the things I feel that could improve the game, improve the longevity of players' life cycles in the game, and improve monetization for PvP, as it currently has almost none. There's no bolster for augments. Ignoring the technical part of this basically means if you do not have these components on your gear, you're losing out on a lot of power. As of current estimates, it's worth roughly multiple pieces of extra gear. That's really not good. As much as I am against expertise returning, it would simplify things for players to allow the entire augment thing to be disregarded, as they could bake in the augment stats specifically into this type of gear. This was a thing previously, and augments still played their normal role, but augments have reached tremendous prices and, in general, could be seen sort of pay to win, though they're completely obtainable with just a lot of grinding. I am neither for nor against what they decide. I don't mind having something to grind for, as I'm a fan of grinding games in general. But I understand the want to be equalized to have a truly competitive environment. This created a rather toxic environment and an incredible oversight of resetting some players caught cheating to 0, giving them the easiest time possible to farm wins from 0 rating to top 3, which actually happened. Some might think that makes it more of a feat, but it simply isn't. When all you have to do is get rating in a small community, it's very easy to manipulate. Sort of another way it felt like they were punished, or punishing legitimate players, in my honest opinion. Prune excess CC like the original plan was, instead of adding in band-aids. I hope to see SWTOR as something more than what others see. A game just in maintenance mode, a game with a failed engine. It has something special and is still quite worth the time. Personally, if another game came out copying this game's combat, I would play it off of the simple fact. I would love to see this game thrive or even get a successor. Until then, we're in limbo, and my favorite infinitely repeatable game mode feels like it's been cannibalizing itself to the point that its population is now in danger for the future of its own kind.
My new friend Cease Faith also brings valid and very important talking points to the table, especially around gear bolstering with augments and how expertise would alleviate this. Although it would cost, the reward should be significant. What seems to be common among our PvP experts is that PvP is just not new player friendly. There is such a huge learning curve to each class that jumping into PvP can easily cause someone to be overwhelmed. Our experts know and have given feedback about how to lessen this negative consequence. The answer would be to change classes enough to make PvP more fun and less annoying. Changing how stuns and CCs work in the game was something the PvP community was eager to look into, but little did they realize that this would spark an idea that would punish classes forever.
I would play arenas for hours, and I was, really disappointed and sad when they removed ranked PvP, but that is what interested me most in this game, and that's why I still, when I have a chance to play, I log on and I queue arenas or I queue war zones, and I pretty much just do that for most of my time. why do I still play Star Wars: The Old Republic? Because it's not my first MMO, but it's my first MMO that I mained consistently and played for so long. And it's something that has an emotional attachment to me as well, not just, from a gameplay perspective and the fun element. It really was there for me for the longest time. And that's why I still play, because no matter what, this game has been around in times where I've needed it the most. And I don't think I could ever, let that go or think of it as anything less than a game that was there for me when I needed it. And my honest opinion about the state of the game right now, it kind of goes as follows. And I think people have been saying this for a lot of years, right? Is if you're a new player, you will love this game and you will have so much to do.
Legacy of the Sith brought about changes to all classes, becoming effectively a class pruning update. Diluting ability pools so players had less buttons to press overall to maintain their playstyles. The idea and concept sounded risky, and when players saw it in action, we all knew it was too much. For the first time in the game's history, they removed the opportunity to get certain abilities with this new expansion, when in the past they've usually added something new or a new version of an ability. This time around, the developer team opted to restrict which abilities players could take on their favourite classes. For example, my Sith Juggernaut has to choose between Mad Dash, Saber Reflect and Force Choke, all of which I used to have before the expansion. Then after, gone. I had to pick only one. It was almost as if the developers did the opposite of what the PvP community asked for. Or perhaps they were ill-informed by internal reviews of the changes before they went live. Although the expansion has brought combat styles split from origin stories, the rest of the changes were still front and center. Obvious. Players noticed this and they were not happy, and this was made worse when they decided to remove ranked PvP play in favour of a battle pass design that offered low effort rewards and needless in-game items, like medpacks. I have enough medpacks to last my characters for thousands of years. Nobody wants or needs more of them. With the out-of-touch sense for PvP, the players drifted away and this left the game a more toxic place than it was before. Ranked players were now in the regular queue, destroying and owning every player, made worse by the fact that the game encouraged pre-made groups. They have since amended this, but the effects were felt for almost 3 years. All of this is without going into the performance side of things too much, but that is a real problem. Star Wars: The Old Republic seems to be the only MMO out there that struggles to achieve a solid 30 FPS in combat scenarios. It is insane that the optimization side of things hasn't been focused on more before now. None of this is to say that PvP isn't fun, because it certainly is, and that's because the players make it fun. But it certainly has its problems, and seemingly the developer team are uncertain on how to handle it. Once again, we come to the issue of ignoring real feedback from players.
This war represents a failure to listen.
If the developers actually considered the ideas the community have, then perhaps PvP will have a future. But until that day, PvP and Galactic Starfighter will remain neglected and mistreated.
And they wonder why the economy is so goddamn messed up in this game. Because they reskin gold items to silver items. This is ridiculous. You may as well just reskin platinum items to goddamn bronze items.
I am no stranger to criticizing the cartel market for this game. Many years ago, the developer team were hyper-focused on releasing new packs you can buy that had random new cash shop items in them. However, they were lazily stacked with reskins, and I decided to call them out with rant videos on YouTube.
It's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous, and I have no idea why they're doing this. Do you know what? I'm going to have to just stop this rant right now. I know that some of you are going to agree with me, and a lot of you are probably also going to probably be smashing that dislike button, but you know what? That's okay, but this is a problem, guys, and this is something that really does need addressing, and making a video and getting you guys to kind of just support this kind of thing is really the type of thing to do when we want to send a message to the developers. So I, SWTOR Central, as a BioWare influencer, am saying that there has been too much of a focus on the cartel market for there to be so many reskins. It is ridiculous. If they're going to put such a focus on the cartel market, then they need to come up with something completely new, or they need to just completely get rid of this focus on the cartel market and start putting some good in-game rewards in. Because I would rather receive a creature companion from doing some in-game missions, maybe some achievements, that kind of thing, maybe a new goddamn stronghold. I don't know, I'm going off on one. I'm going to have to end the video, guys.
It just really annoyed me that the game had truly engaged with degenerate behaviour such as selling RNG packs to their players. It essentially encourages gambling, which is a serious conversation to be had. To resolve this, the developers reached out to me and asked me for suggestions at the time. What they took away from my feedback was that direct purchases on the cash shop were more desirable than pack releases. Give players 100% certainty of the item they want by just allowing them to buy it straight up. The developers loved this idea, and for the first time in history, they changed something for the better. Although admittedly, it was also just a really good business idea, and probably made them more money. So yeah, the reason you can buy things directly is because I annoyed the developers enough into doing it, which is just a fun way of me saying they listened to good feedback for once. Awesome. However, here in 2024, and ongoing, the cash shop now has more than 1,600 individual items you can buy. I don't know if that's more than every other game, but it's definitely the most I've seen. It is clear as day the developer team have been busy over the years, selling cosmetic items and unlocks to the players. But is this a good thing? Fair enough, the game needs to make money, but is selling your soul to the greedy cash shop overlord really the answer? Many people believe this to be the result of EA's obsession with milking money from anyone and anything they can. But I would argue that the developers also have the opportunity to change this, but decide not to. Seemingly, this method of monetization is working for them enough to keep the game alive even today, so they refuse to remove their focus on it. I truly believe that a return of paid content and expansions would mean they back off from releasing new cosmetics and unlocks, but that's a conversation for another day. The fact that they insist on releasing new outfits month after month proves time and time again to players that making money is their top priority, which is a logical conclusion, but comes across as non-caring for the community, especially when the resources they earn don't seem to be reinvested back into the game. The cash shop has more issues. Reskins. Did you know that you could buy Revan's armor on the cartel market? Or you could just use this world drop and dye it. Reskins like this make valuable and sought after outfit pieces mean nothing, and when the game is plagued with them, it makes for little inspiration to make a purchase. While the issue of reskins has slowed down over the years, it has only brought about another issue. The developers have worked with Lucasfilm to bring more familiar outfits and weapons to the cash shop, which sounds good until you realise it's not for the Old Republic themed stuff, but instead, just whatever is currently popular on Disney+. I think players don't mind this stuff, but it needs to be in addition to, and not instead of. There used to be a time where original ideas were on the cash shop, and now it's just inspired by content that more often than not looks like a quick cash grab. Then we have the recent $100 bundles they released, which came at a time of little to no content in the game, which once again struck the wrong chord with players as they found this out of touch. Even I did. The hefty price tag for a bundle that no one asked for is kind of weird. They shoved as much subscription time into it as possible to make it look worth the money. But no one needs subtime if no new content is coming. Perhaps it is not the worst cash shop in gaming. I mean, it certainly has enough choices for you to browse. But the focus to maintain it and milking players with overpriced items is something they need to reflect on. Perhaps making the game free to play and expansions included with subtime was enough to push the game into this corner. So maybe they could do with thinking about opening up former methods of monetization, such as paid expansions and/or chapters that can be bought on the cash shop. We've seen Elder Scrolls Online have success with this.
Blind, deaf, comatose lobotomy patient could feel my anger!
Free-to-play Star Wars The Old Republic has to be the worst game in the entire Star Wars collection. While yes, it gives you up to level 60 for free, it also restricts you way more than necessary.
But what needs to change is transparency on the game. They need to redo their marketing plan. This free-to-play game, the free-to-play part of this is horrible, okay? it is horrible. They should either go do away with it, or do like WoW does, stop them at level 20 or something like that, and just let that be the end of it. Because realistically, by level 20, if you want to keep playing that game or not.
So when a game is free to play, you the player become the product, and your call is the cash shop. The developers want you to see the cash shop and spend money on it, and they'll make it very enticing to you. So while they claim the game is free to play, they do a great job of reminding you while you play that you are not subscribed. You get less XP, you can't claim rewards from certain missions, you can only do so much group content, you can barely speak in the in-game chat, you don't have access to your cargo bay or guild bay, you don't get more than so many credits, you can't hide your head slot, you can't unify your outfit colours, you can't. All the game will tell you is no. So while you can make an account and play the game for free, the full experience of this game and what it has to offer is not free at all. Which makes you wonder, doesn't this make it a trial rather than a free-to-play option? And I would say yes, that is exactly what it means, although it's not something the game has ever identified with or said themselves. The free-to-play method for this game will make the experience so horrible that you do nothing but think about paying. You can't help but wonder how good life is on the other side of the paywall, and to be honest, it is pretty good. When you pay, you get exactly what you ask for. Everything. But when that sub time runs out, you'll find yourself back to free-to-play, but different. This is what we call preferred status, and you can get this by being a former subscriber or just making a purchase on the cash shop. This version of free-to-play will remove some of the limits you previously had, while restricting you just enough to still make you think about subscribing again. For example, you can't hold more than 1 million credits, and one of your crew skills will become unusable. You'll be limited on how often you speak in chat, and you won't be able to play operations, and you will receive limited XP and rewards. This basically means you can have and keep many features in this game without maintaining a subscription to them. A subscription that offers no new content but does remove your limits. A deal that was previously valuable to new players is no longer valuable to the veterans. This method of business model thoroughly hurts the veteran players. While yes, unlocks can be purchased on the cash shop that are permanent, there are still things that you cannot unlock permanently, such as access to operations, and your credit cap being so low, and guild leader features. You are punished for not actively paying the game. While this approach may work for a game that receives a lot of content updates, this behaviour for Star Wars The Old Republic, which is neglective, comes across as greedy once again. They always need a method of milking money from the players without ever offering content in return. This is why paid expansions are so heavily requested once again. Even I dream of a day where I can use money to buy content, and then be able to keep it forever. Maintaining a subscription for Star Wars The Old Republic is not something the dev team is inspiring in the community. They are complacent in players joining for a month or two, then leaving and coming back years later to see what is new, which often now can be nothing at all. In my opinion, the free-to-play model needs a complete redesign from the ground up. Restrictions need to be loosened so players can actually experience how fun the game is, when someone isn't trying to bribe them with fundamental game features. It is common knowledge that the current business model has been off-putting to new players pretty much forever. It punishes players more than it inspires them to keep playing or paying.
During my time in this game, I've seen a lot of things, right? I've seen a lot of things. I've met a lot of amazing people, not just in my own community, but I've met some amazing content creators that I've met in person, hugged, talked to, laughed, cried, drank with. Some of these people I still call friend to this day. I've met some of the developers too, and I can tell you which ones really do love this game. But during that time, I have seen changes, and change happens everywhere. Some changes are good, and some changes are not so good. And what I really, at least for me, have seen in the past couple years is really a decline in storytelling for this game. I don't deal with the technicalities of the game, I don't deal with all the math of the game, but I do love and deal with the story of the game. And that is one of the main things that I really have seen get hurt in this game. If it's the drawn out cadence that we have where we forget what has happened, or it's just a story that doesn't really coalesce or isn't really cohesive with the main Old Republic game or narrative that we are accustomed to and we like. And some people like it and some people don't, and that is totally fine. Everyone should and can have their own opinions about things. But one thing that I have noticed the most is just the degradation of the storyline itself. We're bringing back old characters people thought were gone, we don't want them, and it seems to be a lack of vision and a lack of direction when it comes to telling the story of the Old Republic. And I believe that is the biggest Achilles heel for this game. All this rooting for them, you know, we want to have that reaction that we all had when Darth Mar was done dirty and killed. That's what we want. That's good storytelling. Right now, that's not where we are. Is there hope? Yes, I believe there is hope, and I can see a future for this game. We just need to, you know, stick to it and continue to advocate for this game and be passionate and polite.
Boo! Yeah, that's right. We are back here on Central's channel. It's the almighty goddess demoness and the nerdiest pink fluff Cinera. You also know us as the SWTOR Angels or the Fashion Police. But in this video, we are here to discuss again this hole that isn't always full of shit, which seems to satisfy a lot of you. There were some topics that I had to address, so the first one is, how did I get into SWTOR? Cinera told me about it back when I was 13 years old. I did play it a bit back then, but I wasn't so interested in it. In 2020, however, because of the pandemic situation, I joined the game to spend some time with my bestie, Cinera. Technically, I can say I've been playing since 2020 because before that I didn't really play SWTOR, and as soon as I joined the game, I knew that I wanted to make videos in this game because I didn't feel like a gamer and I can't be bothered to level my characters. So that's how we started to make videos, and now Cinera has trauma with SWTOR because of all the torture she went through by editing SWTOR videos with me. I was never interested in any part of the game, to be honest. I got a level boost and max level gear, both of them bought by a simp, so the only thing I was interested in was creating outfits. At the moment, I'm not an active player. I am logging in maybe once a month to check out if everything is alright. The only time when both of us log in is when we are filming a video or organizing an event. The only thing that is important to me about this game is the people that we got connected to through this game, and the nostalgia for our first YouTube videos because they were all SWTOR themed. Another topic that Sam wanted me to address would be, how would I feel if the game shut down? Well, I wouldn't give a fuck. I would be happy that all the videos we made with all the destruction would make a lot of sense. Like I said in the end of SWTOR, I will be the goddess of ashes, and the ashes of SWTOR will be my throne. The only way this game would improve would be if it had freedom of creativity and freedom of speech without the perverted content creator program, and obviously, more original outfits instead of copies from the TV series and shit. But guys, our channel is full of suggestions on how this game can be improved, so make sure to check them out. I think that the only right thing that they did was adding the Twitch drops, even though the idea of Twitch drops was launched a while ago, so I don't know why it took them so long to implement it. The only mount I'm excited about is the Amethyst Voltilla, which we literally suggested in one of our videos because we knew it was the only thing people would be interested in, instead of some decorations or other shitty mounts. So you should know what our opinion of this game has been. But nonetheless, we will make our last SWTOR event in the beginning of 2025, and we want all of you to attend it. So make sure to subscribe to our channel to know when that event will happen, because during that event, you will finally understand who I am behind this wall of smoke.
Well, there was a question on the SWTOR Reddit of who you watch as SWTOR content creator, right? Or who you watch for your SWTOR content creation. So I just put in there, like I didn't put the links, I just put names in there. Like I put the Angel's name in there, I put your name in there, I put Boomy's name in there, and I hit enter and, you know, fucking less than an hour later, I was banned from the SWTOR forum. I could no longer post in the Reddit forum. And it's fine. It's fine. Like, if you tell me I don't have to go to the SWTOR Reddit anymore, I'm good with that. The cult environment that they have it's not good for new players at all, buddy. The reason being is say I'm coming from Guild Wars 2 or I'm coming from Final Fantasy or not Star Wars, but fucking WoW. Damn. But say I come from one of those games, right? I play this game. Now, I may or I may not like the game. Now, if I find the game not enjoyable and I say, hey, they got forums here for feedback, and I go to give feedback of something that I see is wrong with the game, I'll automatically have the developers, the community manager, in this case, Jackie, the way she is, will come into the post and shut it down. Or, you know, 20, 30 people that are just cult following everything or just automatically jump to defend the game. And it could be something as silly as, you know, I tried to charge on my Sith warrior and I got stuck in a blade of grass. Like, is this a thing? And all of a sudden I'm getting, you know, just talked down to and talk shit to and all this stuff. That needs to change. And not only would it be from the community, but it would actually be from somebody like Jackie who's reading the forums. Like, you know, if she'll call it out on Twitter, she'll call it out on the forums. And it may not even be a toxic comment. If that don't change, dude, you're not going to keep new players here. We know what they're having to go through hiring and firings like and everything, right? So we can spot it a mile away.
I think one of the biggest issues right now that isn't in the game is the community. And by that, I don't mean the people themselves. I don't mean the gamers themselves that are playing. I think that the community managers of old had a good way of communicating with us that made us feel a little bit better about the way things were going, and it seemed like they cared. I don't have anything bad or good to say about current community management, but it just seems like community management and engagement just isn't there anymore. It isn't like it used to, and I feel like that has made people really get soured on the whole company and on what Broadsword is doing, whether it's people being banned from the forums for asking about like raid updates or bringing ranked back or just not being a yes man. I think that scares a lot of people, including myself. I was hesitant about, you know, talking about this because I love my account. I don't want my account to get banned. I don't think I'm saying anything that's inflammatory or rude to the developers or anything like that. But I think a big disconnect right now is that people are afraid to say something because you're going to get banned if you talk about, you know, wanting to have, you know, NIM R4 or whatever that thing was going on, or suggestions that would genuinely make the game better. The emphasis on the cartel market has to go. I get that's probably where the money is that's keeping the game up, but if you're raking in all of this money, and from a business perspective, I understand this, you want to put out the least amount of content for the most money possible, right? Like, you want as many people paying for as little content as you can put out as possible. I get that. But when are you going to do right by the players? Like, at some point, I feel like that should be something that should be talked about. So my experience of being a content creator with Star Wars: The Old Republic has been pretty interesting. I started out as Noble SWTOR and didn't really get a lot of traction for my first couple hundred videos. I was mainly a PvP guy with a little bit of news, and I started a podcast called the SWTOR Community Podcast, which then changed to Noblecast, I think after the midway through the first season. And we talked to a lot of people. We talked to SWTOR Central, we talked to SWTORista, a couple other people throughout the community that really did make everything seem, you know, wonderful. It was a great time, and I loved the PvP side of making videos because there wasn't a lot of people doing it. You had a lot of streamers, but you didn't have people making a lot of videos, and if you did, all of those people are gone now. Like, they don't play the game anymore, and they haven't played in many years, so I felt like I had an opportunity to really make a name for myself, especially in the ranked scenes.
Being in love with Star Wars: The Old Republic actually comes quite easy. For many of us, we are truly attached to the game and what it means to us, just as people or fans of the franchise. It has been there for many of us in our darkest hour, in our moments of need to escape the troubles of our own world and enter one that is truly just beautiful. I don't think I ever realised just how important this game would become to me. I'd find myself thinking about it all the time as a young teenager. The different classes to be played, the stories to learn just simply blew my mind. It quickly became my favourite thing to play, amongst all else. I think it helped that I was so young when I first started playing. I was just 16, barely 17, and now, well, I'm turning 30 next year, so it's been a long ride, but one I don't regret for even a moment.
Invasion. 4, 3, 2. Fucking kill it.
1. Oh my god, no, please.
Fucking kill it. Kill it. Fuck yes.
If you do know me, that means you likely are aware that I've been one of the most active critiques for SWTOR ever since the beginning of Knights of the Eternal Throne, since way back in 2016 and 17. In fact, I even made a video in 2017 naming SWTOR the worst MMO of that year. To reiterate the problems I had at that time, the development team were seemingly struggling to find an identity for the game. Knights of the Fallen Empire took the game in a new direction, offering story content as the focus. Arguably, they delivered on that promise, although it did cost group content dearly. Then comes in Knights of the Eternal Throne, which attempted to appease all players once again, but failed dramatically. It wasn't even so much the story or the writing, it was more so how the game mechanics were being handled. This expansion was the launch of Galactic Command, an RNG-based gearing system that nobody liked at all. Even when the influencer group at the time warned the developers of this being a mistake, they ignored that feedback and still rolled it out. In fact, they kept Galactic Command a secret from even us until just a short time before the expansion officially released, meaning we had little to no time to protest it. In my opinion, they knew this was a bad move and intentionally hid it until the final moment. If we fast forward to 2024, the current year, we see new faces and old faces on the dev team, along with a new studio to work under. Yet the same old issues plague the direction of this game. The devs do not know what content to identify with and what to pinpoint. You'd think the success chapter-based content offered with Knights of the Fallen Empire would be enough to convince them of this, but instead they ignored it and did something else, and that something else is more often than not something ridiculous. For example, players of the game have wanted features like Pazak and Dejarik playable in the game for some time, but instead the developers have opted to create a knockoff swoop event that barely works, a farming event, a cooking event, and baking pies. Whoever is approving these ideas needs to be reminded that they work on a Star Wars game and not a novelty simulator. When players see updates like this in an epic Star Wars game that costs more than $200 million to create, they just think it's lame and don't bother. I'm one of those people, and I refuse to play those events. Why would my Sith Lord who recently slayed the Emperor want to, for any reason at all, help a charity with cooking food? It makes zero sense. It is this direction of uncertainty that knocks players off. Coupled with a lack of communication from the dev team on the game's future, it makes players lose faith.
Hello everyone. Sam asked me to share my feedback on Star Wars The Old Republic, as we both have been official content creators for the game. I'm Averia, and I've been playing SWTOR since release until the year that I was removed from the content creator program. My in-game focus was on sorcery healing and deception assassin gameplay, together with roleplay and other activities. I did this together with releasing YouTube videos that included useful tips and tricks, together with guides for new and old players alike. I also worked very hard to create an inclusive community where new players would feel welcome to ask questions about the game. What originally drew me to the game was the rich storytelling and the life lessons woven into the narrative. Together with the MMO aspect of connecting players with others, SWTOR gave me everything that I sought in a gaming experience. Unfortunately, I no longer play SWTOR. While I'm an avid The Old Republic fan, I can no longer morally support the direction of the game, especially after the veil had been lifted and I finally saw the truth behind the actions from the development team towards its community. This is a question that I'm often asked, and I'm grateful for Sam to give me this opportunity to explain what exactly happened and how it shaped my view on the game. Transparency and honesty have always been pillars on how I approach my content. Whether in managing in-game communities, creating videos, or doing live streams, I always strive to be as holistic as possible. Sadly, this commitment to honesty wasn't appreciated by the development team, and I was accused of breaking NDA. To this day, I'm uncertain what part of the NDA I supposedly violated, as I was always careful to ensure my content and private chats remained within the boundaries of the agreement with EA and BioWare. This leaves me firmly believing that the real issue with my criticism and my distractness of the game was the cause of my removal. Because elsewise they would have at least had a conversation with me if there was a problem with the NDA, or well, really anything. But sadly, there was never a dialogue and I was silenced by the development team. Well, this is my personal story of why I quit the game. There is also the in-game issue, which is evolving on itself, that needs to be addressed. From my perspective, SWOTOR has strayed from being a rich story-driven game to being a content recycling platform. The lack of focus on storytelling, arguably the game's greatest strength, raises serious concerns about its priorities. Instead, the development team seems to emphasize monetization to the cartel market, reskinned items, and repetitive content with lackluster rewards. So yeah, I find that quite disappointing and quite frankly exploitative of the player community. I believe SWOTOR will benefit from a business model that embraces its strength, storytelling and hardcore endgame content. While I wouldn't mind seeing the endgame content phased out, many players already move to alternative games for the gaming experience. The developers need to decide what kind of game they want SWOTOR to be. Should it cater to narrative-driven players, hardcore content gamers, or maybe the role players? Or should it be a balance of these groups? Right now, it feels like the game is stuck in an identity crisis. And the situation is no better in the player versus player community. The removal from ranked PvP was a significant blow. Significant? I can't speak English anymore. Having been deeply involved in all aspects of the game, I've seen firsthand the strength of the small, dedicated fanbase that keeps SWOTOR afloat. However, it's only a matter of time before they realize that they are not receiving enough in return for the investment of time and passion. The identity crisis stems from a lack of direction and insufficient funding from the higher-ups. While I can understand the challenges the development team faces, that doesn't justify the censorship of community opinions or the overly capitalistic focus that sustains the game. But cracks are starting to form, and we are the first to see it. In these times, I hope that those who have been silenced or cast aside or have been neglected can band together, give a message back. Perhaps this can be the start of a positive change for both the content creators and the Star Wars community. My hope is that the game will rediscover its identity and thrive once again, instead of continuing this downward spiral. And maybe if this happens, will I see myself logging in once more.
It's more than clear that players have felt this way for a long time. The fanbase is here, but no one is paying attention at the studio. We crave new content, we crave new and more epic stories, but quality has dipped pretty much ever since 2016 and 2017. The bulky updates we used to get are now non-existent, but that doesn't mean the game doesn't currently have a direction. It's just not one really people expected. Since the release of the latest expansion, Legacy of the Sith, the dev team have been striving towards improving the game's visuals and modernizing the back end. To explain, that means they are improving their own internal systems to be able to make content more easily. It is no surprise to anyone that this game's engine is a very, very big mess, so they are cleaning this up and converting older assets into more modern ones. Not all of these updates are visible, but the ones that are come in the shape of art modernization. This is basically remastered older content that improves fidelity all around. So far, they've tackled worlds like Korriban, Typhon, Ord Mantell, Hutter, Ilum, and Hoth, also Voss. And there is more to come. In fact, we have reason to believe they will just keep doing this until they've converted everything into more modern and workable assets. While the cleanup and visual improvement is nice and welcomed by myself, many in the community believe this officially puts the game into maintenance mode. That could be true, but undeniably this is a solid move and indicates that the game isn't going anywhere anytime soon. Once again, it refuses to die, no matter how bad the situation gets. Even after EA forcing it to move studios for its survival, the game carries on. Despite the out-of-touch updates, the game carries on. Despite the immense amount of ignoring feedback, the game carries on. It is simply invincible. For a game that gets accused of constantly having a small budget, this is an impressive feat. We've seen games like Terra and WildStar be shut down, but I guess the Star Wars IP alone is enough to keep this project moving forward. In fact, it's my personal belief that the Star Wars IP alone is what keeps this game alive. If a new Star Wars MMO released tomorrow, with a more modern engine and game system, this game would be dropped like an outdated toy. While the developers have been performing these modernization updates, other avenues of the game have suffered. PvP is ignored as usual, Galactic Starfighter seems to have been forgotten about once again, the story has been one long chapter, dragged on for over nearly 5 years now. The whole Darth Malgus thing literally started in 2019, everything since then has been filler and boring new characters that pretty much nobody vibes with. There are a couple outliers, but overall the story has suffered deeply. Whether this comes down to their ability to write something good, or their lack of intentions to focus story content as they should be, is unclear. Story writing in this game was unrivaled before. Now most people would spacebar and skip through the new stuff out of lack of interest. Even the development team have decided to cut back on voice acted content and insert more KOTOR dialogue themed content. While some players agree that this compromise is okay, other players like myself think that it's going to cost the game's identity too much. After all, its biggest selling point was being fully voice acted to begin with. The moment you take that away, the MMO becomes a shell of its former self. Some people would be afraid to say it, but it would seem to me that the internal writers have been focusing on their own narratives versus something that will make a good Star Wars story. Let me ask you, when was the last time you killed a bad guy in Star Wars The Old Republic? Can you remember? Let me remind you, it was the Sith Emperor. The last person we killed was a galaxy-wide bully. Is this code for something else? I'm being serious. Look into this. Since we killed the Emperor, we have made no significant kills across the board. Darth Malgus, still alive. Shea Vizsla, alive and well. Satele Shan, she's drinking cocktails somewhere doing nothing as usual. Literally, no one in the galaxy is at risk. Even the 2 new characters they introduced cannot be killed by the players, which is really annoying when you dislike them. In fact, this gets worse when on the dark side playthroughs, you're now forced to not harm people. A third person will enter the situation and say, "This is a bad idea, don't do this," and then the cutscene carries on as if I'm okay with this conclusion. The ability to be a ruthless murderer has been taken away in favour of a story where nobody dies anymore and seemingly nobody is at risk. We're having to be accepting of the new characters we meet and their circumstances and dialogue. Does that sound familiar? Old companions in the game have been updated to be bisexual, so players have more choice in romance. Even one of the older companions, who is literally a force-eating monster, can be romanced now. And the dialogue for it is suspiciously similar to someone who identifies a certain way, if you catch my drift. I'm not going to go into this too much, but I know someone else who has thoughts on this.
I think what you got in BioWare, well, not BioWare, but, well, we know BioWare is because they're cooked right now. But I think what you got there are a ton of DEI hires, a ton of them. And, you know, I'm going to defend it a little bit. I shouldn't, but I'm going to. So as a business owner, if I want to make money, right, the government will step in when you're doing DEI hires, right? And they give you a little, you know, a little something on the side for having a DEI hire. The only problem with your company that you have to worry about is the DEI hire talented enough to fill the role? That's one. The second one is, do I have enough people to properly train the DEI hires in order to make them skilled for wherever you hire them? And the third one is, if you go too far into DEI, then your regular person out on the street, like that's just coming, that may have been in the business for 20 years, right? If you pass over that person that's been in the business for 20 years, has an outstanding resume for a DEI hire, at that point, the person with 20 years experience has just become a victim of a more or less forced discriminatory action. there are a lot more things going on in the game that pushes narrative over good story. Like, nothing against the two girls writing. I'm sure they're lovely people, but seriously, they haven't bothered me. My problem isn't who's writing the story. My problem is the writing of the story is okay at best. It's not compelling.
I'm not going to sit here and say with 100% certainty that the writers are bad at their jobs, but a lot of this adds context and some of us are just willing to call it out. I would very much like to see the game become its best self, but with developers like this leading the way and creating our story content, I'm not sure I have much hope. If you're still wondering why my hope isn't very strong, then look at the new date night missions they added. While yes, they are fun for a niche part of the player base, they are also completely unwanted by the vast majority, who are waiting for actual story content or something else that is relevant. Why is the Star Wars game making repeatable date night missions that take up to an hour, rather than making 1 hour of good replayable content that is Star Wars themed? Now, there are some people out there who seem to believe we've come to the point where simply nothing is pleasing the players, and therefore, listening to the players is futile. Well, let me just ask you to repeat that to yourself a few times. Nothing is pleasing the players. Rather than looking for a way to blame the players for this conclusion, we need people to look at why this is happening in the first place, which as always is the developers ignoring critical feedback, and now in favour of listening to the toxic positive crowd. It also came to the point where developers noticed similar feedback to what I'm giving now, which sparked censorship across the board. Any negative feedback from then on was seen as hurtful or degrading. Players who expressed themselves on the forum found their accounts muted and/or flagged. The community manager, Jackie, has even banned players who asked about content that has yet to come or was promised previously, such as the Master Mode version of a new operation. This was promised a long time ago and they just forgot to do it. The same with a crafting revamp. This was also promised many years ago now, and since then, we've heard literally nothing about it. When players ask for an ETA or why it isn't here yet, the community manager will silence them. The newest community manager, Jackie, has even claimed that she developed new strategies for community growth and development via her LinkedIn page, kinda confirming that she was indeed using a new strategy when she took over as community manager here. Jackie had single-handedly become the oppressor of the official SWTOR forum, an approach that was never used by the former community manager Eric Musker, who in his own words would tell you that feedback is important. When it is your job to register feedback and relay it back to the team, it is important to be able to use a filter that allows you to read all feedback regardless of how it is portrayed. To be clear, players should also not abuse the developers with malicious words. I don't need to give you any examples of a bad word, but the point is Jackie is censoring people who even use careful language. In fact, it's gotten so bad that she has turned off replies on her Twitter profile, so now players can't even communicate with the community manager on social media, which is kind of ironic. A privilege they used to enjoy with Eric Musker and others. To add to this, members of the SWTOR dev team have in fact blocked me personally for my own opinions on the game. You, my viewers, have your own eyes and ears. You can go through all of my videos if you wanted to, and you'll never find something that is out of pocket or unfair. I've always been quite honest and genuine with my opinions, which obviously scares people off who don't like being exposed. Even members of the SWTOR community, such as SWTORista, have ostracized me for not partaking in their parade of toxic positivity. For context here, I used to be a member of the influencer group for Star Wars The Old Republic, but when my opinions no longer lined up with the view of the newest dev team at the time, I was swiftly booted out. In doing so, I was portrayed as a toxic individual who does not say things in good faith. Before I was removed from their program, every single one of us were on good terms. SWTORista used to join me on my channel. She sent me gifts in the game. Our channels basically grew together and we both led the way for everyone else. But as soon as BioWare cut ties with my channel, she blocked me on social media without even speaking to me. I was exiled not only by the dev team, but also the other creators, for nothing more than speaking my thoughts. In fact, I'm willing to bet if you show up to a SWTORista livestream and ask her about previous collabs with me, She'd likely ignore you, ban you from her chat, or even say something along the lines of, "Central says things in bad faith," and you'll get no further explanation. As far as I knew, myself and Swerterista used to be friends. I still speak quite positively about her when people ask me about her YouTube channel, although I'm not shy from also revealing this story. But if you are afraid of the truth, well, then I think that is just very telling. I want to emphasize here and now and make it very clear that not all members of the influencer group are victims of toxic positivity. I don't even totally blame Swerterista. If the developers were willing to throw me out, they might be willing to do the same thing to her. And not everyone is so willing to risk their position in that program, especially when it is your livelihood. So it could be the case that Swerterista and others fear speaking out of turn or associating with myself because they too will be removed and seen differently by the community. Although I must say, I've seen nothing but support for my own YouTube channel. Speaking up does indeed inspire loyalty from your viewers. Hopefully soon more people will understand this premise. I wanted to include Averia's opinion on this too, because she suffered a very similar fate to myself. So when it came to Averia being removed from the program, she was also ostracized by other creators. No one bothered to reach out to her and see how she was, and no one cared that BioWare just suddenly dropped yet another content creator. This was shortly after they also removed Peter the Cellcath for having similar opinions, which makes 3 people now who were removed from the program for simply giving their feedback. So the trend of developers ignoring feedback from players eventually leaked through into the influencer program. So much so that they just decided they didn't want us anymore and only wanted the people who were overly excited about anything and everything that they do, as if they didn't praise them, they would be punished or something. They have successfully alienated innocent creators into never speaking their real opinion, in fear of losing their ability to be in the program and have exclusive perks, such as a direct line to the developers via a private forum, occasional video calls to collect more intimate feedback, access to interviews with developers, and free gifts and codes. So long as you toed the line, you would have all these things and more. For myself, I only wanted the developer interviews, so when I was removed, I was sad to learn that they wouldn't be happening anymore. I did actually offer an interview with the developers before making this video, where I was going to give them the opportunity to be included. But as usual, over the past 4 years, they ignored me, despite my channel being the #1 traffic source for Star Wars The Old Republic pretty much at all times. They don't see me as a valuable asset, they see me as a threat, which is just really silly. I know another member of the influencer group actually walked away from it, because they saw what was happening and refused to play along. They've asked me not to name them, and I will respect that, but what I will tell you is that the community manager accused this innocent person of being intimidating, and that was the last straw for them, and they walked away from the group. For the record, this person in question is nothing but kind and awesome, but I guess because they are a man and have a deep voice, they are seen as threatening, but that's only for people who judge with their eyes and not their hearts. For final clarification, I'm in no way trying to downtalk any of the influencer members that currently exist. I know many of them and enjoy their content, but I can only tell you what I know based on my own experience and what I have observed over the years. So I sincerely apologize to any influencer who may be watching this video who feels offended. I would have reached out to members of the influencer group for comment, but if it wasn't obvious already, most of them avoid speaking with me for reasons already mentioned in the video. Not all of them, some of them do speak to me. They risk their position in the program by affiliating themselves with me though. Also, as previously mentioned, Swerterista has blocked me, so I was completely unable to reach out to her. And of course, I asked the developers for an interview, but I was ignored. Therefore, this video was made without their input, and perhaps that was for the best. If the game director sees this video and would like to arrange an interview with me, then please do reach out. I'd still be interested in doing that, and I feel the players would respect you for it. Let's make it happen. If you enjoyed this video and learning about how Star Wars The Old Republic survives despite being mistreated, then be sure to subscribe. My channel has lots of content to offer you, ranging from in-depth lore videos about high-profile characters, all the way to voice-acted stories and epic what-if tales. Also, a huge thank you to everyone who appeared in this project. It wouldn't have been possible without them. So thank you Boomy Nation, Ivanhoe, Ceasefaith, Noble Plays, Averia, Celadon, and also Goddess and Sanira. Also, I want to say a huge thank you to the developers who are behind the scenes of Star Wars The Old Republic. All too often, we see only the usual suspects, and I don't want you to think that our criticism is a blanket statement for the entire staff. This is not true. Many of the developers on this game clearly care deeply for its future. Others, not so much. Under better leadership, the developers who do care would thrive even more. Recently, Eric Musco took over as game director, so I guess this video will serve as a checkpoint for when he started. Perhaps in time, we'll make another episode of this and we'll cover how the game has been handled since Eric Musco took over. For now, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching, and may the Force be with you.